I'm Bengt Nordstrom. I'm from Northstream, a consulting firm based in Stockholm, Sweden. I'm here to talk about SDN and NFV and what we have found when we have worked with operators and vendors in that space. We are a boutique-size strategy consulting firm, or management consulting firm if you wish. 25 people, and we're based and operating from Stockholm in Sweden and Helsinki in Finland. Most of our work is done for operators, about 80% of the work, where we work with business and technology strategy. So in a way, we don't have any vested interest in SDN and NFV. We're not selling anything, such services, or not being a system integrator or anything. We're just looking at it from sort of our more kind of objective perspective. But we have since last year been working quite a lot in this space, and it's based on assignments from operators and vendors, and therefore so what I would present today is opinions formed from all this interaction with particularly operators but also vendors. When you have had three such good presentations from Mark, Neil and Jack, there is not much left in a way. So I have about 30 slides or so, and I think about 5 of them still can add value to the discussion. So, but I truly mean that I really liked what I heard this morning. So I will dive into a few of the areas here. Two observations before we start into the material. And which is sort of guiding a lot of the work that we do. First one is that remembering that the telecom industry in one way is a phenomenal success from a sort of political policy. We have established competition between operators, vendors, handset systems that have sort of built an enormous global market that is able to build networks and serve customers. But we have come to a stage where I would dare to say that the big sort of growth area is over. And most of our clients, when we work with them, are in a situation where they have organizations, technology, people, processes that are based on the growth era of this industry. And they're trying to, all the best they can, to adopt to a market where cost and agility is of more importance, because you will have traffic growth, but not necessarily revenue growth. Secondly, which has been following me throughout my 30 years in this industry, is that the telecom industry is always looking at the IT industry with a kind of anxiousness. We are following the IT industry, and we're trying to determine what's happening over there and will they take over the telecom industry. When I was working with Ericsson in the 80s, the idea from management was that IBM will take over everything if we not watch out. That really never happened, but we have this worry and we are impressed by the IT industry. What I think have happened over the years is that the IT industry is in many ways winning the standards and technology solutions race, but the vendors in the industry remain the same. If you talked about with operators 15 years ago about using Ethernet as a protocol for connecting base stations with controllers, it was a stupid idea, thought the telecom industry. Today it's just a pure reality. We have worked with telco system-based Wi-Fi solutions, Hyperlon, which never became anything, it became Wi-Fi. So in many ways, we are following and we are adopting, and this is clearly an area where the IT industry is tremendously influencing the telecom industry. The question is in what form. So just starting with the basics here, and this has been covered by Neil a lot, but if in very simplified graph here on the left-hand side, that could very well illustrate a traditional sort of Cisco router. A fairly profitable area for that company. And then you, on the right-hand side, need to connect them together, and then the engineers discovered that this was working, but when you upgraded and needed to change the network, you need to go to every separate box here on the right-hand side and do that upgrade and change, and the more boxes you have, the more complex it will be. So that is a real problem. And the other problem here is that Cisco was is a very profitable company in that space, and many people like to get in there. One way of doing that is to adopt, to benefit from all this software development we have in this industry and get networks more software-based. And then you can separate, as you see in this slide, control and data plane. And the idea is that you can have, on the data plane level, very simple products, much less costly than a Cisco router. Is there any Cisco person in the room, by the way? Good, I'm safe, thank you. And then you can have an advanced control plane from a central point, and therefore reconfiguration, upgrade of networks will be much more simple. And there are a lot of expectations here on that, this will be lower cost, CapEx, OpEx for operators. Such as automation, increased network control, increased serviceability, and reduce hardware cost. And I won't go into detail here because, again, Neil has covered this quite well. Same idea around network function virtualization. On the top level here, you can see, I don't show the sort of before slide here, but it basically meant that all these network functions were separate products, or still are in many networks, firewalls and such things. And then you are instead creating a hardware resource machine at the bottom here. Again, simpler, cheaper hardware. You are creating a virtualization level, and you can allocate these resources freely and therefore have more dynamic and flexible environment to operate from. So this is the basic idea. And I won't go through the details here, but it's faster time to market is mentioned, deliver service agility, reduce need for over-provisioning, and so forth. And this is sort of views coming from when we have researched this area, but also what our operator clients are telling us when we talk to them about this. I'm sorry, Mark, I'm showing informal research now, but I hope you forgive me for that. But it's a survey that they did, and that is really confirming what European Communications found in their study. Expectations on flexibility and scalability. That's the highest one ranked here in this diagram. I was a bit surprised to see that the fourth one here, less vendor lock-in, came in so low. So I think when you see the flexibility and scalability, I think you're touching on what I mentioned in the beginning here, that the whole overall network environment for an operator with processes, people, and systems is a very complex one. And very few operators have a clear roadmap of how to get rid of that. And it's hope that SDN will mean that for operators. I won't go through how they interact, but they are mutually beneficial, but they are not really dependent on each other. And we find when we talk to operators on this slide that when we talk to particularly higher management at operators, they don't. I think if we really push them, they cannot tell the difference between virtualization and software-defined networking or cloud. It's the same term for making things simpler and cheaper in their lives. And that's why it's so refreshing to hear someone like Neil, who is sort of can go into depth on this, on what it really means. I don't think in general that sort of CXO level is on that competence level right now. We find that the idea, the general idea, if you go down to the fifth point here, that the most sort of common response we get from operators is that OpEx savings is the big opportunity. Less expectations on hardware. Still we hear, of course, that sort of simplified network view that if I only could buy very, very cheap hardware from a Taiwanese or Chinese company, and then everything I run as separate products today will just be applications on that. I think, that's a very, very remote goal we have in this industry. I think it will take a very long time, if it ever happens, But it is sort of that vision that you have. You buy basically a PC, and then you run the HSS and EPC on that or something like that. But maybe too simplified. We believe, and we hear that from our clients, that there is if sort of the peak of the Gartner curve was last year, there is an increasing awareness and realization of how, which is the last point on this slide, that this is a gradual process. It will take a long time to implement it and to really get impact OPEX and CAPEX-wise for operators. If we look at, there's a lot of buzz in the industry. Particularly the bigger players are really paying a lot of attention to it. They have the most complex networks, of course. They are most resourceful and can really put people aside to develop and think about architectures. And that's what we see. That's why we see, AT&T's Domain 2.0 and Telstra's trial with working with Ericsson and Ciena on virtualization. We have Telefonica having an advanced trial which might be similar to what BT is doing here on virtualizing part of the CPE. And we have Docomo, of course, with their 290,000 people, whatever they are, that have done virtualized EPC solutions with Alcatel-Lucent, Cisco, NEC, Huawei, Nokia, and Ericsson. From our perspective, this is, these are not sort of operators that will be the sort of ones that will leverage and benefit first from this trend. They are more sort of putting resources into this so that we actually can form standards and solutions and agreements between how interoperability and so forth. So they are sort of voluntarily, which makes sense, being the guinea pigs of the industry. And I doubt that they will be market leaders because the complexity of their organizations will still make them slow movers. I have a number of use cases here. I will skip through them because that was actually far better covered by Neil. And I move to implications for vendors, and this is coming back to my first point here. Do IT vendors pose a big risk to the incumbent telco vendors? Well, first of all, that's a question we have had many times in this industry. There is always this idea that a new technology brings new competition and is changing the landscape completely. And I mentioned this sort of simplified dream of operating everything from a PC based on applications that is currently separate products. We see in our vendor discussions that the general feeling is that the legacy vendors are perceived to be a bit too slow. That is valid from all the sort of normal household names, Ericsson, Huawei, Nokia, and others. And people are impressed by companies like Mavenir and so forth, smaller, no legacy. And I think that is also, one of the challenges here, that the existing vendors, they need to deal with their legacy provision of equipment and services they have delivered to those operators. So that's why they are slower. On the other hand, we also find when you really push the issue, would you really like to separate control and data plane? And buying that independent and asking questions about SLAs and so forth, then, our operator clients become a lot more hesitant, I would say. They like to have the best of both worlds, cheap hardware and software, but the same SLA and someone to point to when something goes wrong in the network. And this is, of course, a very, complex architecture and change you're going through. So that question will be very relevant. We have a feeling of that because of the legacy situation with operators and how slowly operators are able to move, not because they are bad or in a sense or form, but just because the complex environment they are operating in, this will be a very long process. So we currently believe that serves the incumbent telecom vendors quite well. This will not move faster than that standards will be set and various formations of how NFV will work in reality between big vendors and big operators, like the ones I mentioned before, or the ones that are doing extensive trials right now, will sort of make it relatively slow moving. And therefore, our current conclusion, and we might change that, but as we currently see the world, we don't think there will be, this is less disruptive than maybe currently it is perceived by the industry. Basically meaning that the vendors, give and take a few, will be the same going forward as they are today. Then to the last topic here, Jack from Juniper talked about this, and I can just agree 100%, or even go beyond. I would say that SDN and virtualization standalone, without transforming the business, is meaningless, will add very little value. And I could say that for any situation when an operator is introducing new technology. It doesn't matter if we talk about Volta, the new sort of voice communications platform for operators, if we talk about SDN and NFV, if we talk about 4G. If you don't deal with the legacy situation that you're having, again, with people, processes, and systems, the small savings you get from virtualization and software-defined networking is very limited. From the Juniper slides, we saw, a CTO, a CMO, and a CIO changing competence. If you push the issue, you can say that, well, maybe it's not the same people then. Can you reasonably expect that sort of, with that competence profile, are those the people that will suddenly change and guide the company through being much more agile, self-service provided solutions to the customers and so forth? I think it's an enormous change. And we see, a lot of the work in our company is based on business transformation. And we really know, I'm not saying here that to promote that and that we are the solution to the problem. I'm saying it more from perspective, we understand how complicated it is to change an operator. It normally has to start with, working with what services are we providing to our customers, both consumer and enterprise? And how can we change those services, how we package and sell them? And, leveraging from all the IP and internet development you have had in the world where customers can interface services over the web and so forth. And then, take that all the way back to business processes, to BSS, to networks and so forth, and therefore really leveraging from the SDN and NFV opportunity. But this is, for us, the key message. Without business transformation, SDN and NFV has very limited impact. Thank you.